Sometimes the most powerful moments happen in the most unexpected places. A young woman walks into a gun store, and within minutes, everything changes. What starts as casual mockery from strangers becomes a profound lesson about respect, service, and the hidden stories we all carry. This is more than just a story about assumptions. It's about the moment when ignorance meets truth, and how one person's quiet dignity can transform an entire room. Get ready for a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about judging others by their appearance. Sarah Martinez stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic and looked up at the weathered sign above the gun store. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and she could already feel the weight of curious stares from the men gathered near the entrance. At 22, Sarah looked even younger than her years, with her petite frame, casual jeans, and oversized hoodie that seemed to swallow her whole. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to navigate the world despite constantly being underestimated. The gun store sat on the outskirts of a small Texas town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and newcomers were sized up within seconds of arrival. The building itself was nothing special, a converted warehouse with cement walls and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh, industrial feel. Glass display cases lined the walls, filled with an impressive array of firearms that gleamed under the bright lights. The smell of gun oil and leather hung in the air, mixing with the faint scent of coffee from a pot that had been brewing too long in the corner. As Sarah pushed through the heavy glass door, the conversations that had been flowing freely among the customers suddenly died down. She could feel their eyes following her every movement, taking in her youthful appearance and casual attire. The store was busy for a Wednesday afternoon, with about a dozen customers browsing the selection or engaged in animated discussions about various firearms and hunting stories. Behind the main counter stood Jake Morrison, a man in his 50s with graying hair and arms covered in military tattoos that spoke of years of service. He had owned Morrison's gun shop for over 15 years, building it from a small operation into one of the most respected firearms dealers in the region. Jake prided himself on running a professional establishment where customers were treated with respect, regardless of their background or experience level. Near the rifle section, three men in their 30s and 40s had been examining a new shipment of hunting rifles. They wore the unofficial uniform of serious gun enthusiasts, camouflage caps, tactical vests, and boots that had seen plenty of outdoor action. Their conversation had been loud and boisterous, filled with tales of successful hunting trips and debates about the merits of different calibers and manufacturers. When Sarah entered, the tallest of the three, a man named Rick who worked at the local auto shop, nudged his companions and made a comment just loud enough for others to hear. His voice carried the kind of condescending tone that people use when they think they're being clever but are really just being cruel. The second man, Pete, who ran a small construction business in town, joined in with his own observation about young people and their supposed lack of understanding about firearms. His words were wrapped in a thin veneer of humor, but the underlying message was clear. They didn't think Sarah belonged in their world. The third member of their group, a man named Tom who worked at the grain elevator, added his own commentary about how different things were when he was growing up, when young people supposedly had more respect and understanding of serious matters. Their words weren't overtly hostile, but they carried the weight of assumptions and prejudices that had been building for years. Sarah heard every word, but her expression remained neutral. She had learned long ago that the best response to such behavior was often no response at all. Instead, she approached the counter where Jake was helping another customer complete a purchase. She waited patiently, her hands clasped in front of her, observing the store's layout and the various firearms on display with the kind of careful attention that suggested she knew exactly what she was looking for. The customer Jake was helping, an older man in his 60s, completed his transaction and left with a friendly wave. Jake turned his attention to Sarah, his professional demeanor intact despite the undercurrent of skepticism that seemed to permeate the store. He had seen plenty of first-time buyers over the years, and he prided himself on being able to guide them through the process with patience and expertise. Jake's initial assessment of Sarah was influenced by the same assumptions that had prompted the comments from the other customers. Her youthful appearance and casual dress suggested to him that she was probably looking for something simple, perhaps a small handgun for personal protection, or maybe she was shopping for someone else entirely. He had dealt with plenty of girlfriends and wives who had been sent to pick up firearms for their partners, and he assumed this was likely another such situation. The three men near the rifle section had quieted their commentary, but continued to watch the interaction at the counter. Their attention wasn't unusual. In a store like this, customers often took interest in each other's purchases, sharing advice and opinions freely. But their focus on Sarah felt different, charged with the kind of anticipation that comes when people are waiting for their assumptions to be confirmed. Other customers in the store had also taken notice of the young woman at the counter. Some were genuinely curious about what she might be looking for, while others seemed to share the skeptical attitude of the three men by the rifles. The atmosphere in the store had shifted subtly but noticeably, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Sarah's presence had introduced an element of uncertainty into what was normally a predictable environment. Gun stores, especially in small towns, often developed their own culture and unwritten rules about who belonged and who didn't. Regular customers became part of an informal community, sharing knowledge and experiences in ways that could be welcoming to some and intimidating to others. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the dividing lines between Sarah and the other customers. The glass display cases reflected the faces of those watching her, creating a kaleidoscope of curious and skeptical expressions. The smell of gun oil seemed more pronounced now, as if the very air in the store was challenging her right to be there. Jake cleared his throat and asked Sarah what he could help her with today, his tone professional, but carrying the kind of careful neutrality that people use when they're not quite sure what to expect. His question hung in the air, and Sarah could feel the weight of everyone's attention as they waited for her response. The moment stretched on for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the impressive array of firearms displayed throughout the store. She had come here with a specific purpose, armed with knowledge and experience that none of these men could possibly imagine. But first, she would have to navigate their assumptions and prove that she belonged in this world just as much as any of them. The stage was set for a confrontation between appearance and reality, between assumption and truth. In the harsh light of the gun store, surrounded by the skeptical stares of men who thought they had her figured out, Sarah was about to reveal just how wrong first impressions could be. The quiet confidence in her posture suggested that she was more than ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. What happened next would not only surprise everyone in the store, but would also serve as a powerful reminder that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with dignity, knowledge, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving. Sarah looked directly at Jake and spoke with a clear, confident voice that cut through the expectant silence in the store. She wasn't here to browse or ask basic questions about home defense options. Instead, she had very specific requirements that immediately caught Jake's attention and caused him to reassess his initial assumptions about the young woman standing before him. She began by explaining that she was looking for a precision rifle system, something in the .308 Winchester caliber range, with specific requirements for accuracy, reliability, and modularity. Her words weren't the hesitant inquiries of a novice, but the precise specifications of someone who clearly understood firearms technology at a professional level. She mentioned barrel length preferences, stock configurations, and optics mounting systems with the kind of casual expertise that typically took years to develop. Jake's eyebrows rose slightly as Sarah continued to outline her requirements. She talked about minute-of-angle accuracy expectations, discussed the merits of different barrel manufacturing processes, and demonstrated a thorough understanding of ballistics that far exceeded what he normally encountered from customers. This wasn't someone who had spent a weekend reading gun magazines. This was someone who spoke the language of firearms with the fluency of a true professional. The three men who had been making comments earlier had gradually moved closer to the counter, their skeptical expressions slowly giving way to confusion and, then, grudging interest. Rick, the auto shop worker who had made the first dismissive comment, found himself listening intently as Sarah discussed technical specifications that he only partially understood. His confident smirk had faded, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that this young woman might know considerably more about firearms than he did. Pete, the construction worker, had stopped pretending to examine the hunting rifles and was now openly eavesdropping on the conversation at the counter. His initial assumption that Sarah was out of her depth was rapidly being undermined by her demonstration of knowledge that clearly went far beyond casual gun ownership. The condescending tone he had used earlier seemed increasingly inappropriate as he listened to her professional-level discussion of firearms technology. Tom, who worked at the grain elevator, had been the most vocal in his criticism of younger generations and their supposed lack of serious knowledge. Now he found himself in the awkward position of listening to someone half his age demonstrate expertise that he could never hope to match. His comfortable worldview, built on assumptions about age and appearance, was beginning to crack under the weight of contradictory evidence. Other customers in the store had also begun to take notice of the unusual conversation taking place at the counter. A few had moved closer, drawn by curiosity about what was clearly becoming an interesting exchange. The atmosphere in the store had shifted from skeptical anticipation to genuine interest as people began to realize that something unexpected was happening. Jake, for his part, was rapidly adjusting his approach to the conversation. As a former military man himself, he recognized the terminology and precision that Sarah was using. Her questions weren't the random inquiries of someone who had watched too many action movies. They were the specific requirements of someone who understood exactly what she needed and why she needed it. When Jake asked about her intended use for such a precision rifle system, Sarah's response was measured but revealing. She explained that she needed something suitable for competitive long-range shooting, with the potential for professional applications. Her words were carefully chosen, but Jake could read between the lines. This was someone who worked in a field where precision shooting was more than just a hobby. The conversation then turned to optics, and Sarah demonstrated an even more impressive depth of knowledge about telescopic sights, range-finding systems, and ballistic compensation. She discussed magnification ranges, reticle designs, and glass quality with the kind of detailed understanding that spoke of extensive training and practical experience. Jake found himself checking his own knowledge against hers and was somewhat embarrassed to realize that she was teaching him a few things he hadn't known. As the technical discussion continued, Sarah mentioned her preference for certain manufacturers and specific product lines that were typically only known to serious professionals in the firearms industry. She talked about companies that specialized in military and law enforcement contracts, demonstrating familiarity with products that weren't commonly available to civilian consumers. Her knowledge base was clearly built on more than just book learning or internet research. The three men who had initially mocked her presence were now completely silent. Their earlier confidence evaporated in the face of Sarah's obvious expertise. Rick had moved to within a few feet of the counter, ostensibly looking at handguns, but clearly listening to every word of the conversation. His initial assumption that this young woman was playing dress-up in a man's world had been thoroughly demolished. Pete had given up any pretense of shopping and was now openly staring at Sarah as she continued her technical discussion with Jake. The construction worker who had made jokes about young people's supposed ignorance was now confronting the uncomfortable reality that this particular young person could probably outshoot him with her eyes closed. Tom had retreated to a position near the ammunition display, but his attention remained fixed on the counter conversation. The man who had confidently proclaimed that his generation understood serious matters better than the current one was now witnessing a demonstration of knowledge and competence that completely undermined his comfortable prejudices. Jake, meanwhile, was beginning to piece together clues about Sarah's background that painted an increasingly impressive picture. Her casual mention of certain training facilities, her familiarity with specialized equipment, and her professional approach to firearm selection suggested a background that went well beyond casual gun ownership. He began to suspect that he was dealing with someone who had received extensive professional training. The conversation took another turn when Sarah asked about availability and delivery times for the equipment she was discussing. Her questions suggested that this wasn't a casual purchase she was planning over several months. This was something she needed relatively quickly for professional purposes. The urgency in her voice, combined with her obvious expertise, created an intriguing puzzle that Jake was eager to solve. As other customers continued to listen in, the dynamics in the store had completely reversed from the situation that had existed just minutes earlier. Where there had been skepticism and condescension, there was now curiosity and respect. Sarah had transformed the environment simply by demonstrating competence and knowledge, proving that assumptions based on appearance could be not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. The fluorescent lights that had seemed harsh and unwelcoming when Sarah first entered now seemed to highlight her quiet confidence and professional demeanor. The glass display cases that had reflected skeptical faces now showed expressions of curiosity and growing respect. The atmosphere in Morrison's gun shop had been fundamentally altered by one young woman's refusal to be intimidated or diminished by the assumptions of others. Jake realized that he was dealing with someone special, someone whose knowledge and experience demanded a level of respect and professionalism that went beyond his normal customer service approach. He began to treat the conversation with the seriousness that Sarah's expertise deserved, asking detailed questions about her specific requirements and offering suggestions based on his own extensive experience in the firearms industry. The stage was set for what promised to be an even more dramatic revelation, as Sarah's true background and the reason for her impressive knowledge base were about to be revealed in a way that would fundamentally change how everyone in the store viewed both her and their own assumptions about who belonged in their world. That Jake's curiosity finally got the better of his professional restraint. After 20 minutes of increasingly technical discussion, he found himself asking the question that had been building in his mind since Sarah first opened her mouth. He wanted to know where she had acquired such extensive knowledge about precision firearms and professional shooting systems. Her expertise was clearly the result of serious training and practical experience, but her youthful appearance made the source of that training a fascinating mystery. Sarah paused for a moment, seeming to consider how much information she wanted to share with the room full of strangers who had been so quick to judge her when she first walked through the door. The men who had mocked her entrance were still listening intently, their earlier confidence replaced by obvious curiosity about this young woman who had completely upended their expectations. When Sarah finally responded, her words were measured and professional, but they carried an impact that rippled through the store like a shock wave. She explained that she was currently serving as a sniper instructor with a specialized military unit, responsible for training elite soldiers in long-range precision shooting techniques. Her casual mention of her military occupation was delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone she had used to discuss rifle specifications, but its effect on the store's customers was immediate and profound. The silence that followed her revelation was complete and absolute. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade into the background as everyone in Morrison's gun shop processed what they had just heard. The young woman they had dismissed as an inexperienced outsider was not only a military professional, but someone entrusted with training other soldiers in one of the most demanding and specialized skills in modern warfare. Jake's expression transformed from curiosity to respect, and then to something approaching awe. As a former military man himself, he understood the significance of Sarah's position and the level of skill and expertise required to achieve such a role. Sniper instructors weren't just good shots. They were among the elite of the elite, individuals who had demonstrated exceptional abilities and had been entrusted with passing those skills on to the next generation of warriors. The three men who had been so quick to mock Sarah's presence now found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having to confront the magnitude of their error. Rick, the auto shop worker whose dismissive comments had started the chain of assumptions, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His confident smirk had been replaced by an expression of profound embarrassment as he realized he had been mocking someone whose skills with firearms far exceeded anything he could ever hope to achieve. Pete, the construction worker who had joined in the mockery, was staring at Sarah with a mixture of disbelief and growing respect. The young woman he had dismissed as ignorant was actually someone who had dedicated her life to mastering the very skills he claimed to value. His comfortable assumptions about age and expertise had been completely shattered. Tom, who had been the most vocal about generational differences and the supposed superiority of his own generation's knowledge, was confronting the humbling reality that this representative of the younger generation had achieved more in her few years of service than he had accomplished in decades of civilian life. His patronizing attitude seemed particularly inappropriate now. Sarah continued her explanation, mentioning that she was currently on leave between training cycles and was looking to upgrade her personal equipment for an upcoming competition shooting event. She spoke about her military service with the kind of understated professionalism that marked true experts, confident in her abilities, but without boastfulness or arrogance. Her words carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned the right to speak with confidence about her field of expertise. The other customers in the store had gradually moved closer to the counter, drawn by the fascinating revelation about Sarah's background. A few of the older men, particularly those with military experience of their own, were looking at her with expressions of unmistakable respect and admiration. They understood what it took to achieve the position she described, and their earlier skepticism had been completely replaced by genuine appreciation for her accomplishments. Jake found himself asking follow-up questions about Sarah's service, his professional interest now mixed with personal curiosity about her experiences. As a former soldier himself, he was eager to learn more about the training programs and techniques that current military snipers were using. Sarah was generous with her knowledge, sharing insights about modern training methodologies and equipment developments that fascinated Jake and the other military veterans in the store. The conversation revealed additional details about Sarah's background that made her expertise even more impressive. She mentioned specialized schools she had attended, training programs she had completed, and the rigorous selection process that had led to her current position. Each detail added another layer to the picture of someone who had not only achieved excellence in her field, but had been recognized by her superiors as someone capable of teaching that excellence to others. As Sarah spoke about her experiences, it became clear that her knowledge of firearms was just one aspect of a much broader skill set that included ballistics, meteorology, mathematics, and psychology. Modern military snipers were far more than just accurate shooters. They were highly educated specialists who combined technical expertise with tactical knowledge and mental discipline. Sarah embodied all of these qualities in a package that had completely defied the expectations of everyone in the store. The transformation in the store's atmosphere was remarkable to witness. Where there had been skepticism and condescension, there was now respect and admiration. The men who had questioned Sarah's right to be in their space were now hanging on her every word, eager to learn from someone whose expertise far exceeded their own. The power dynamics in the room had completely reversed, with Sarah now clearly established as the most knowledgeable person present. Jake's approach to the customer service interaction had evolved from basic helpfulness to genuine collaboration between professionals. He was now offering access to specialized equipment that he normally reserved for his most serious customers, discussing products and services that reflected Sarah's true status as an elite professional rather than the novice customer he had initially assumed her to be. The three men who had been so quick to judge Sarah were now dealing with the uncomfortable reality of their own ignorance and prejudice. Their assumptions about age, appearance, and gender had led them to completely misjudge someone whose qualifications and experience put her in a completely different category from themselves. The lesson was clear and humbling. Appearances could be not just deceiving but completely misleading. Other customers in the store were beginning to engage with Sarah directly, asking questions about her service and expressing gratitude for her dedication to protecting the country. The respect in their voices was genuine and profound, reflecting their recognition of the sacrifice and commitment that military service represents. Sarah had gone from being an object of skepticism to someone worthy of admiration and respect. The atmosphere in Morrison's gun shop had been fundamentally transformed by the revelation of Sarah's true identity and qualifications. The harsh fluorescent lighting now seemed to highlight her quiet dignity and professional competence rather than emphasizing her youthful appearance. The glass display cases reflected faces showing respect rather than skepticism, and the conversation had evolved from condescension to collaboration. As Jake continued to help Sarah with her equipment needs, it was clear that this interaction had become something far more significant than a simple customer service transaction. It had become a lesson in the dangers of assumptions and the importance of treating every person with respect and dignity regardless of their appearance or perceived qualifications. The men who had learned this lesson the hard way would likely remember it for the rest of their lives. The revelation of Sarah's military background had created a profound shift in the store's atmosphere. But Jake could sense that there was more to her story than she had initially shared. As he continued helping her evaluate different rifle systems, he noticed subtle details about her demeanor and knowledge base that suggested additional layers to her professional experience. Her familiarity with certain classified equipment specifications and her casual references to training programs that he knew were highly restricted indicated that her military service might be even more specialized than she had revealed. Jake's suspicions were confirmed when another customer entered the store, an older man in his 60s wearing a veteran's cap that identified him as a retired Army Ranger. The newcomer, whose name was Colonel James Harrison, had been a regular customer for years, and Jake knew him to be a decorated veteran of multiple conflicts who now worked as a military contractor. Colonel Harrison had barely entered the store when his eyes fell on Sarah, and his expression immediately shifted to one of recognition and surprise. The colonel approached the counter with the kind of purposeful stride that marked career military officers, but there was something else in his manner, a deference and respect that Jake had rarely seen from the usually confident veteran. When Colonel Harrison addressed Sarah, he used a tone that was both formal and deeply respectful, immediately establishing that he knew exactly who she was and what her accomplishments represented. The exchange between Sarah and Colonel Harrison revealed additional dimensions to her military career that left everyone in the store speechless. The colonel mentioned a recent training exercise where Sarah had achieved shooting records that had become legendary within certain military circles. Her performance had not only exceeded existing standards, but had set new benchmarks that other instructors were still trying to match. The casual way in which these accomplishments were discussed only emphasized their significance. Colonel Harrison went on to explain to the fascinated audience that Sarah was not just any sniper instructor, but was considered one of the top 3 precision shooting instructors in the entire military. Her expertise was sought after by special operations units from multiple branches of the armed forces, and she had been responsible for developing new training protocols that had improved the performance of countless soldiers. The respect in the colonel's voice made it clear that he considered Sarah to be truly exceptional, even among the elite circles in which he moved. The 3 men who had initially mocked Sarah now found themselves in an even more uncomfortable position. Not only had they misjudged someone with impressive military credentials, but they had mocked someone who was considered a legend within the military community. Their embarrassment was visible and profound, as they realized that their casual dismissal had targeted someone whose skills and accomplishments put her in a category that few people ever achieved. Rick, the auto shop worker who had made the first dismissive comment, looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. His face had turned red with embarrassment as he realized that he had mocked someone whose shooting abilities were the stuff of military legend. The confidence he had displayed earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by a crushing awareness of his own ignorance and presumption. Pete, the construction worker, was staring at Sarah with an expression of complete disbelief. The young woman he had dismissed as inexperienced was actually someone whose name was spoken with reverence in military circles. His comfortable assumptions about age and expertise had not just been wrong, they had been spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. Tom, who had been the most vocal about generational differences, was confronting the humbling reality that this representative of the younger generation had achieved a level of excellence that he could never hope to understand, much less match. His patronizing attitude toward younger people seemed particularly inappropriate when directed at someone who had already achieved legendary status in her field. The conversation between Sarah and Colonel Harrison continued to reveal impressive details about her service record. She had served multiple tours in challenging environments, had been personally recognized by high-ranking officers for her contributions to mission success, and had received commendations for her role in training operations that had saved countless lives. Each detail added another layer to the picture of someone whose service record was truly exceptional. Jake found himself listening with fascination as the two military professionals discussed technical aspects of modern warfare and training methodologies that were far beyond his own experience. As a former soldier himself, he could appreciate the significance of what he was hearing, but he also realized that Sarah and Colonel Harrison were operating at a level of expertise that few civilians ever encountered. Other customers in the store had completely stopped their own shopping to listen to the extraordinary conversation taking place at the counter. Several were veteran themselves, and their expressions showed deep respect and admiration for Sarah's achievements. Others were civilians who might not fully understand the technical details being discussed, but could certainly appreciate the reverence with which both Jake and Colonel Harrison treated Sarah. The atmosphere in Morrison's gun shop had evolved far beyond the typical customer service interaction. It had become an impromptu gathering where military professionals shared knowledge and experiences while civilians gained insight into a world that few of them had ever truly understood. Sarah's presence had transformed the store from a simple retail establishment into something approaching a military briefing room. Colonel Harrison mentioned that he had heard about Sarah's upcoming participation in an international competition shooting event where she would be representing the United States military against elite shooters from around the world. The pride in his voice was unmistakable as he explained that Sarah was considered not just a participant, but a favorite to win the competition. Her reputation had preceded her even in international military circles. As the conversation continued, Sarah demonstrated the kind of humility and professionalism that marked true experts. Despite the obvious admiration of everyone around her, she remained focused on her equipment needs and spoke about her accomplishments without boastfulness or arrogance. Her attitude was that of someone who had simply done her job well and was continuing to strive for improvement and excellence. The three men who had mocked her entrance were now dealing with the reality that they had targeted someone whose achievements put her in a completely different category from anyone they had ever encountered. Their casual assumption that they belonged in this environment, while she did not, had been completely reversed. They were the ones who seemed out of place in the presence of such genuine expertise and accomplishment. Jake realized that he was witnessing something special, not just in terms of Sarah's individual achievements, but in terms of the lesson being provided to everyone in the store about the dangers of assumptions and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. The men who had learned this lesson the hard way would carry its impact with them for years to come. The interaction had become a masterclass in professionalism, expertise, and humility. Sarah had not sought to embarrass or humiliate those who had misjudged her. She had simply demonstrated competence and knowledge while maintaining the kind of quiet dignity that marked true leaders. Her example was teaching everyone present about the difference between genuine expertise and mere posturing. As the conversation between Sarah and Colonel Harrison continued, Jake found himself witnessing something he had never seen in his 15 years of running the gun store. The colonel, a man whose own military accomplishments commanded respect throughout the region, was treating Sarah with a level of deference that went beyond simple professional courtesy. There was genuine admiration in his voice as he spoke about her contributions to military training programs and her reputation among elite units. The colonel mentioned that Sarah had been personally selected by the Pentagon to develop new marksmanship training protocols that were now being implemented across all branches of the military. Her innovations had not only improved training effectiveness, but had also contributed to saving lives in combat situations around the world. The scope of her influence extended far beyond her own shooting abilities to encompass a broader impact on military readiness and effectiveness. Jake's respect for Sarah had grown tremendously throughout their interaction, but the colonel's revelations about her broader contributions to military excellence elevated his appreciation to an entirely new level. This was not just someone who was exceptionally skilled at her job. This was someone whose work had made a meaningful difference in protecting the lives of American soldiers and improving the effectiveness of military operations. The three men who had initially mocked Sarah's presence were now confronting the full magnitude of their error. They had not simply misjudged a skilled professional. They had mocked someone whose work directly contributed to national security and the safety of military personnel. The embarrassment on their faces was profound and well-deserved, but Sarah's continued professionalism prevented the situation from becoming unnecessarily confrontational. Rick, the auto shop worker whose dismissive comment had started the chain of assumptions, finally found the courage to approach the counter. His earlier confidence had been completely replaced by genuine remorse as he realized the depth of his mistake. With visible difficulty, he offered a sincere apology to Sarah, acknowledging that his behavior had been inappropriate and expressing genuine regret for his assumptions and comments. Sarah's response to Rick's apology demonstrated the kind of grace and professionalism that marked her character throughout the entire interaction. Rather than accepting the apology with cold formality or using the opportunity to further embarrass him, she responded with genuine warmth and understanding. She acknowledged that assumptions were natural human behavior, but emphasized the importance of treating everyone with respect regardless of initial impressions. Pete, the construction worker, followed Rick's example and offered his own apology, which Sarah accepted with the same professional grace. Tom, who had been the most vocal in his criticism of younger generations, seemed to struggle more with his embarrassment, but eventually managed to express his regret for his earlier comments. Sarah's responses to all three men were consistent, professional, gracious, and focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on past mistakes. Colonel Harrison observed these interactions with obvious approval, recognizing in Sarah's behavior the kind of leadership qualities that had contributed to her military success. Her ability to transform a potentially confrontational situation into a learning opportunity demonstrated the kind of emotional intelligence and professional maturity that marked truly effective leaders. Jake, meanwhile, had completed his assessment of Sarah's equipment needs and was preparing to place orders for the specialized items she required. The transaction had evolved far beyond a simple sale to become a collaboration between professionals, with Jake eager to ensure that Sarah received exactly what she needed for her upcoming competition and continued military service. As word spread through the store about Sarah's identity and accomplishments, other customers began approaching her with expressions of gratitude for her service and admiration for her achievements. Several veterans in the store shared their own stories and experiences, creating an impromptu gathering that celebrated military service and expertise. Sarah's presence had transformed the store's atmosphere from one of casual commerce to something approaching a military reunion. The conversation eventually turned to Sarah's upcoming international competition, where she would be representing not just herself, but the entire United States military against elite shooters from around the world. Colonel Harrison explained that this competition was considered one of the most prestigious events in the international military shooting community, and Sarah's participation was seen as a significant honor for American forces. Jake offered to expedite Sarah's equipment orders to ensure that she had everything she needed well before her departure for the competition. His gesture was motivated not just by good customer service, but by genuine pride in being able to contribute, however modestly, to supporting someone whose achievements brought credit to the entire military community. As the afternoon wore on, the gathering in Morrison's gun shop had evolved into something special, a spontaneous celebration of military excellence and professional achievement. Sarah's presence had created an opportunity for people to come together around shared values of respect, service, and dedication to excellence. The three men who had initially mocked her had become some of the most enthusiastic participants in honoring her achievements. The transformation in the store's atmosphere was complete and profound. Where there had been skepticism and condescension, there was now respect and admiration. Where there had been assumptions and prejudice, there was now understanding and appreciation. Sarah had accomplished this transformation not through confrontation or anger, but through simple demonstration of competence, professionalism, and grace under pressure. As Sarah prepared to leave the store, Colonel Harrison stood and offered her a formal salute, a gesture of respect that was immediately echoed by Jake and several other veterans in the store. The sight of these experienced military men saluting the young woman they were honoring created a powerful visual reminder of the importance of recognizing excellence wherever it is found, regardless of the package in which it comes. Jake's final words to Sarah as she prepared to leave reflected not just his appreciation for her business, but his genuine admiration for her character and achievements. He addressed her as "ma'am," with the kind of respect typically reserved for high-ranking officers, acknowledging not just her military rank, but the personal excellence she had demonstrated throughout their interaction. Sarah's departure,